Hello, I am here. This time I will tell you about Manhwa entitled Godslayer. The story begins with a man seen deliberately letting his body sink to the bottom of the water. I don't know what problems have happened to him that made him seem to have lost his desire to live. At the same time, several random memories flashed through his mind. They showed a woman who was driving a car, then got into a terrible accident. The man thought that he would drown immediately, but soon a pair of hands appeared to be trying to reach him, and it turned out that the man and the girl were only following swimming practices held by their teacher. The poor man seemed not accepted in his environment, and for some reason, many of them openly expressed their dislike for this man. But fortunately, he still has people who are always beside him and often become protectors who are ready to silence those who want to say harshly to him. This woman is named Su. Everyone seemed to be nice to him when Su was by his side. But Bei Ming knew that all of this was just a facade. Bei's fortitude had indeed been formed a long time ago, and even as a child Bei was also very familiar with the inappropriate treatment of his friends. And what's even sadder is not only his friends but even his own family also apply the same to him. In the past, Bei's figure was greatly admired among his school students because the basketball team he led often qualified for prestigious events representing his school. But all of these were just happy memories of the past, let alone being admired. Now he was even considered trash by his own former teammates. Bei's normal life began to change when his hands and feet had to be amputated due to a severe accident he had with his late mother. Since the time when Bei felt the world was so cruel. As usual, Su always waited patiently for Bei when school hours ended to go home together. On the way home, Bei tells Su to stop acting as his protector at school because Bei doesn't want Su to be treated the same as himself. These words made Su remember the memories when he and Bei were small. As a man, Bei always wanted to appear as a protector in front of Su, but the opposite happened. Bei and Su's steps suddenly stopped when a group of thugs tried to bully them. Even though Bei had said that he had no money or valuables, the thugs didn't care at all. They even used Su as a hostage to threaten Bei. Then heard a voice from the punks saying that they would let Bei and Su go as long as Bei would take off all the clothes he was wearing. Su, of course, he didn't accept that Bei had to do such a stupid thing. But Bei prefers to obey because he knows that the two of them will not win if they force a fight with that delinquent. The barbaric thugs did not keep their promise. After taking Bei's pocket money, they also took the artificial arms and legs that were attached to his body. Seeing this, Su couldn't stay still. He quickly punched and managed to knock one of the punks down. However, his heroic actions had to be stopped because the thugs took advantage of Bei's weakness to threaten Su. The thugs quickly grabbed Su and threw him against the street wall. Instantly it occurred to the punk's mind to take action that wasn't crazy towards Su. In a situation like that, Bei felt that he was very useless because as a man he couldn't even protect Su from those rascals. Even so, Bei didn't want to just give up. Then with all his might, he tried to fight back even though he knew the possibility of winning was very small. Sure enough, a knife fell and stabbed into his body. Bei was surprised to find a knife already stuck in his stomach. The stab wound of course caused very heavy bleeding, so Bei fell unconscious. At a time like that, Bei's dark memories resurfaced again. Bei felt so useless for not being able to save his mother. At that time, Bei really didn't expect that because of his weakness, a similar incident would have to happen again to Su, the only woman who cared about him and was always beside Bei. At the same time, a flash of light appeared in the sky, very quickly descended to the earth, and shot towards Bei. Everyone was shocked, including Su, who witnessed the strange incident in front of him. Bei, who was originally dying, now slowly seems to be getting back up after the strange light hits him. Not only that, Bei looks like he has a strange power that surrounds him. The atmosphere is even scarier because Bei doesn't say a word, plus his face now doesn't look like a normal human's. Suddenly Bei uses this mystical power to take an arm bone from one of the punks in front of him. Suddenly everyone was frightened by his actions. Unsuspectedly, it turns out that among the delinquents there is a demonic figure who is disguising himself as a human. Satan tried to apologize to Bei for the mistakes he had made before, but Bei didn't respond at all and he preferred to swallow the devil using his strength. After that, Bei slowly walked over to Su, who was scared. Because Su knew Bei's body was being controlled by something very powerful and also sinister, Su, who was cornered, couldn't do anything but try to communicate with Bei. It's a shame that what was done failed, considering that Bei's soul seemed to have disappeared and his body was now completely controlled by this strange power. Again, we are shown flashbacks of Bei's life just before he and his late mother had an accident. That day should be a happy day for Bei because on that day he and his mother will go to celebrate her birthday. At first, Bei felt a little strange because his mother instead took him to the temple to worship. Then his mother explained that she didn't want Bei to forget to thank her for the blessings they had received so far. After that, they went to eat like a birthday celebration in general. But unfortunately, they even had a terrible accident in the middle of the road. Under the subconscious, Bei heard a strange voice talking to himself. It turns out that the sound comes from a creepy form that is in front of him. Out of curiosity, Bei tried to establish communication with the scary figure, but what happened was that the figure wanted to attack him instead. Suddenly Bei woke up from his long sleep. He was surprised because now he was in the hospital. Even though the last time he remembered that Su and himself were being mugged by a group of thugs, the dream just now seemed very real to Bei. The figure was really very scary, and without Bei knowing, the figure that was previously present in his dream was now behind him. A big scary dog that was exactly the same as in his dream was now actually in front of Bei. Suddenly Bei tried to hide from the figure, but his actions provoked the anger of the dog. He kept urging Bei to tell him what had happened because the dog's real body suddenly disappeared and now his spirit is attached to Bei. Of course Bei can't answer that question because he doesn't know about what happened to him. The dog's spirit saw the expression shown by Bei. The dog realized that Bei had nothing to hide. The dog could only mutter in annoyance to himself. He had absolutely no idea what his intentions and purposes were for being sent to the human world this time. But the dog doesn't really care about this. Without thinking twice, he wants to run away from Bei and intends to live freely in the human world. But what happened was the opposite. A chain suddenly appeared and pulled him back to Bei. He really couldn't believe an ordinary human like Bei had the ability to use the spirit lock technique. At the same time, Bei suddenly felt a great headache. He recalled the events of that night. Shortly after, he was possessed by the spirit of the dog. Unfortunately, Bei could not remember the incident in full, but for sure he knew himself at that time as completely controlled by the dog. The dog seemed to know what Bei was thinking. He then said that on that night it was Bei himself who had killed his girlfriend. Bei, of course, he was very surprised to hear this, although it could not be confirmed for sure. But he also couldn't ignore the dog's words, because at that time Bei was completely unaware of what he had done. For a moment Bei was silent and suddenly burst into laughter for no reason. The dog was surprised by the change in Bei's attitude. Not long after, Bei rose from his bed and shouted while facing up. He vented all his frustration because according to him God was very unfair because he had taken away everyone he cared about. Then he asked the dog about its origins. The dog then explained that he was a great demon who was very strong and was feared by many people. But Bei didn't really care about this. The dog was even more confused by Bei's strange behavior, especially when Bei walked closer to the window. Immediately the dog panicked because he was afraid that Bei would do something stupid. Because if Bei dies, then he will automatically die too, because the souls of the two of them are bound to each other by the chains that bind the spirits. Bei's actions suddenly made the dog very angry. But unfortunately, a feeling of despair had taken over his whole soul, so he didn't care about anything anymore, including his own life. Without thinking, Bei wanted to throw himself from a height and hope that all the suffering of his life would end soon. The dog was automatically attracted to him, but unexpectedly a strange spider web suddenly caught Bei and pulled him back up. Bei was even more confused when he found out that a beautiful nurse had just saved him. Bei looked so surprised and confused because the nurse who had just saved his life was now trying to seduce him. But at the same time, a dog named Tiangu can feel a strange energy residing in Bali's charming face. Sure enough, not long ago the beautiful nurse showed her true form to Bei, while telling his true intentions, which is that he wants to make Bei his prey. Suddenly Tiangu told Bei to use a scissor to fight the demon, but it was ridiculous that Bei even thought that Tiangu told him to use a two-leg lock technique known as the scissor technique in martial arts. Even though Bei had tried hard to get rid of the demon seemed even more excited and wanted to prey on Bei. Seeing that Bei was powerless to face the demon alone, Tiangu finally had to speak up in the hope that the demon would recognize and feel afraid because he had faced the demon god. But unfortunately, even though the demon recognized Tiangu and knew exactly who he was, this did not make the demon afraid to face him at all. Because the demons thought that Tiangu was not as great as before, nothing more than a pet that bonded with weak humans like Bei as its master. Tiangu looked very irritated at hearing these demeaning words. His anger grew even higher because the devil was underestimating him even more. Without thinking, Tiangu then tried to attack the demon. But what happened was that his attack couldn't even hit the demon at all. Suddenly it occurred to him that all of this had something to do with Bei. Then it was discovered that since Tiangu was tied to Bei, at that time his strength became weak because he was also absorbed into Bei's body. That was the reason why the demon dared to oppose Tiangu. This is what drives the demon even more eager to prey on Bei, remembering that if it succeeds, it will also become stronger because it has absorbed the power of Tiangu, which was sealed in Bei's body. Tiangu could only mutter in annoyance because he couldn't do anything, because indeed almost all of his strength was now inside Bei's body. Meanwhile, Bei himself still does not have the ability to use this power. It wasn't long before the devil was surprised by Su's arrival to visit Bei. At the same time, Bei realized that all this time he had been lied to by Tiangu about Su's death. Meanwhile, Su, who didn't know what was really going on, looked so annoyed because he thought that Bei was making out with the nurse. Since Su had already seen his true form, the devil intended to devour Su at that moment so that his true identity would not be exposed. But luckily Sue, who already mastered martial arts techniques, was able to dodge and counterattack the demon. After getting a hard blow from Sue Devil, it seemed even more eager to attack him again, and even Devil didn't hesitate to use his power to attack Sue. Well, that's all the story for the first part. Next,